Well, good afternoon. My name is Craig Stanley, and I am a cloud economist with VMware. And yes, that job is every bit as cool as it sounds, especially if you like economics and mathematics. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the economics of VMware Cloud on AWS versus native public cloud. And to get started, we need to, I guess, take a little bit of a trip through economics. And what are we talking about when we say cloud economics? What do we really mean? Well, let's start with the evolution of practical economics. Economics started out, I guess, kind of from a barter system at its earliest stage, where you simply exchanged goods with someone for something you wanted. So if I have a chicken and you want a chicken and you've got apples, okay, I'll trade a chicken for an apple or for 10 apples. But kind of the problem with that was that it's kind of hard to walk around with a lot of chickens. It's not really practical. So the problem is you had all these things you were looking for to trade. The other problem was that every person was essentially a commodity broker. So if I traded with someone for 10 apples, then I either needed 10 apples or I had to find somebody else who needed 10 apples that I could trade my apples for to get what I wanted. So really, the barter was the simplest approach. So we realized again, walking around with a lot of chickens in your pocket really wasn't practical. So we evolved to a system of what I call a tokenized system. So we replaced the chickens with very heavy pieces of metal, which again was a little better, but over time wasn't really all that effective either. So they became really sort of a tokenized approach where we replaced the things we had to sell with some other object. As I mentioned, went to gold to silver. We went to fancy little pieces of paper with fancy writing on them. All the way today to plastic cards that simply give us access to a string of binary digits. So we've essentially changed our role from a broker to a consumer. So we're really more of a consumer. We're not brokering services anymore. The idea, though, is that in each of these stages of evolution, the complexity of decisions and the risk involved with the decisions has gotten higher as we go. And I look at it kind of moving forward to today where we're dealing with a lot of complex negotiations, really functioning more from a strategist standpoint and dealing with, again, complex decisions, complex negotiations. And there's some research that was done in 1979, very interesting, essentially said humans are not rational in making decisions. The one Nobel Peace Prize the Nobel Prize in Economics, not the Peace Prize, the Economics Prize. It was three gentlemen, Kahneman, Tversky, and Thaler, really came up with this idea of behavioral economics, which takes a look at how do we factor in the irrationality of decision-making that humans have into the decision process. Well, let's take a look at kind of how I've adapted it in some of our methodologies. I look at that as risk in decision-making. And what we're pointing out is that cost is really only part of the decision that when we make. You also have to identify and evaluate several other types of things. Like, for example, what if this solution or this thing I'm trying to do, what if it doesn't work out like it's supposed to, or the vendor says it will? What if it turns out to cost a lot more and take a lot longer than they're saying? What if I get locked into something that I have trouble getting out of? Is there a way that I can implement a plan B or something if something doesn't go the way it should go? So we're faced with all these decisions. And the interesting point is we got really three kinds of choices. We can do anything, we can do everything, we can do nothing. But the reality is that risk exists in all three of those decisions, even the do nothing scenario. So part of the analysis we want to go through is look at how do we help you fill in the blanks? Because with more information, we can answer some of these questions. With more information, we have more confidence in that decision. So let's take a look at kind of how we apply and approach that to VMware Cloud on AWS. So the first thing I take a look at is things about completeness and speed. So we're going to talk about spaghetti sauce here. So on the left-hand side, we can go with a pre-packaged solution. Everything's in there. So we've got everything ready to go. It's very easy to implement. We just open the can and we're ready to go. So high speed and pretty good degree of completeness. Versus over on the right-hand side, building everything from scratch. Now, arguably, you may be able to you can configure and customize the solution on the right much better than you can the one on the left. But what it does also indicate and point out is that we do need, it's going to take a lot more time to make the sauce from scratch, and it is going to require some degree of skill. Not everyone can get in the kitchen and whip up a batch of my mother's favorite special spaghetti sauce that is like a secret recipe. So not everyone can do that. It does require some skill. So let me take a look at another aspect, which is from the terms of flexibility. So if I'm looking at, if I go to a bar or to a restaurant, I can order a glass of wine and I get one glass of wine. If I decide I want just a little bit more wine, I have to buy another glass of wine. It's sold by the glass. I'm kind of limited in the serving size. Whereas if I buy a bottle, then I can have as many glasses as I have resources for. And this is really kind of the analogy we're making between, on the left, a VMware Cloud on an AWS solution where we have a host that we can split up any way we like versus buying a single public cloud native instance. And that's really where we're taking a look at, again, the flexibility. And that's, again, part of the choice. And it is going to be applicable to the specific use cases that may exist as well. The third thing, and I think one of the most important parts, is really understanding what's under the waterline. So when we look at public cloud native, some of the costs are easy to identify. They're very much upfront costs, things like the compute cost. We know that. We know what the storage cost will be. We know what the networking cost will be. So we have an idea of those. But from the analysis that we've done, and we've been doing these analyses for about 2 years within the economics group at VMware, we've identified a lot of other costs that a lot of times customers either don't know or they don't really know how big these are. And things like switching costs. Switching costs would be things like rehosting, refactoring, replatforming, the labor costs associated with doing those things. Carrying costs are really the cost of continuing the on-premises solution while you're in the process of implementing the public cloud native solution. A lot of times you're going to be carrying dual costs for some period of time until those applications are migrated over. There also may be additional software and services that have to be purchased to add on to the service to make it what we call functionally equivalent to what we would have with a VMware Cloud on AWS solution. We've also got support. Support costs have to be added in. And then one that I also think is very significant is the switching time, which with some organizations could be months, it could be years. And what we're showing from the analyses we've done is these tend to run about 35 to 40, 45% on the costs we can calculate and we understand versus the remainder being these costs that are sort of under the waterline that we really need to understand before we jump into these projects and these deals. So let's talk about specifically about some of these costs that are under the waterline and kind of what we've been able to do to help out. This is some research that was produced by IDC. IDC went out and interviewed these customers that were customers of VMC on AWS. And these were the main areas we take a look at. The first one we talked about was reworking, refactoring. We have a gaming company that reported back a 57% lower cost of migration. They were able to move 2,000 plus VMs in a weekend. So again, very high speed migration, 4-to-1 savings in terms of their migration time. In terms of retraining and reskilling, another customer pointed out that it's really pretty straightforward. If you're a VMware shop, moving the workloads is pretty straightforward to move it from on-premise to the cloud. It didn't really require any retraining, reskilling, any additional resources. The next one took a look at the cost of lock-in. And this was the West Windsor Plainsboro Regional School District. And the big point there was that they like the idea that they can easily move their workloads from point A to point B and from point B back to point A. And again, all of this is happening very easily because they're using the framework, essentially vMotion. But the other point of all this is that they're avoiding downtime because they're able to move these workloads without taking the workloads down. And that kind of leads into our fourth box here about the cost of operations. And again, another customer that reported that really enjoy the idea that they've still got full control over their workloads and where they want to place them. And that it is very easy to move those workloads back and forth where they may want them moved. Now, this is an example. We do, within the cloud economics team, we do offer a service we do. It's a free service. We just work through our cloud economists.
I have a question.
Our cloud specialists. Sorry, was that a question?
Yep. So if you go back on the previous slide,
Sure.
There's the statement that VMware Cloud on AWS is less expensive, but how are you getting there? Right? Are you factoring in like total cost of ownership and lost time doing migrations and things like that, or are you just like what's behind that statement?
Yeah, we're factoring everything. Let me take a look. Let me take you into the next slide. This is actually our analysis, how we do that. So you see on the top is our TCO, and this is a typical type of a customer example. And I'll be honest, we've found that VMware Cloud on AWS is less expensive than on-prem about 80% or so of the time. There are use cases, for example, if a customer has a large amount of storage, where it may be more expensive to be VMC on AWS, especially before we had the i3 EN hardware. Now that we got the i3 ENs, we can compete better in a high storage environment. But yeah, there are some use cases. So this is not a TCO model that says VMware is always the right choice.
So
there's some choices where it isn't. Yes.
So your storage here says it's $0 for VMware Cloud on AWS?
That's correct. The storage is included in the price of the host.
How much storage?
The storage depends on whether it's an i3 or an i3 EN. I believe the usable capacity on an i3 is about 7.7 terabytes per host.
Okay.
And the EN is about 4 times that.
Okay.
And that's what we do as part of our sizing analysis. As Dave had just shown actually in his API, that API call to the sizer, we actually leverage the sizer, when we do our analyses. It's vmc-sizer.vmware.com. We put in, that's the sizer we use as well. It's open for anyone to use. You put in information about your workload and it comes up with a calculation of what is the correct number of i3 or i3 EN hosts to support that workload. It does that calculation based 3 different ways. It calculates it based on CPU capacity. It calculates it based on the memory capacity and then storage. And then it picks the answer that meets all 3 conditions. So it's not one that's just going to automatically pick the smallest number, for example. So in this example, we start with the TCO and we go through the compute, storage, networking, functional equivalent software. So to make this apples to apples comparison from an on-premises side, what that means is vSphere, NSX, and vSAN. So we're including the cost of that. We go through facilities costs, labor costs, and so forth. Again, from a VMware Cloud on AWS, we really only have the compute. We do have some networking. So there's networking traffic. So there's some cost associated there. And there is some labor costs, but we've been able to essentially remove labor associated with management of the hardware and of the SDDC stack, because that's now all handled by VMware at the VMC side.
So Craig, where do you come up with these costs? Do you use industry averages? Do you ask the customer for a ton of data? Do you make assumptions? How do you actually calculate a realistic TCO for comparison's sake?
Yeah, we use industry standard numbers and we let the customers adjust those numbers. Everything in this model is completely adjustable. So we come up with a sort of a baseline. We talk to the customer, and if they've got better, closer numbers, then we adjust our numbers to match what they tell us. And as I mentioned, everything is tweakable in the model. So they can if they have different costs, we can factor that in. And then from a public cloud perspective, we're looking at the same sort of thing. We've come up with an estimation of things like the functional equivalent software is something we've estimated on a function by function basis. In particular, working with EC2, it may be very different working with other clouds, but again, these are all numbers that we can, that again are adjustable. We can work with the customer to determine what would their actual number be for their particular use case. And so we factored in support as well. Now the switching costs, these are the migration costs for rehosting, reskilling, and then migration downtime. In this particular case, we're looking at doing the migration with only 4 full-time FTEs. And so based on that analysis, we've calculated how much the cost will be to do these, assuming that the average migration takes about 10 hours. And again, that is also a number that can be adjusted. I've spent hours on the phone working with different engineering teams, tweaking their numbers. And in most cases, it's still surprising how much time it's going to take when you start actually doing the calculations. Reskilling and so forth. Migration downtime is the time we're counting because you can move the workloads from on-prem to VMC on AWS without incurring any downtime. So we're calculating about $1,000 per hour of downtime, which is actually not very much, about 60,000 over a 3-year migration period there. So that's not huge, but it's in there. The other kind of a softer benefit we take a look at is the other benefits, increased IT team efficiency. This comes from research done by IDC, where they're suggesting that efficiency-wise, you can 1 FTE, you can reduce the efficiency by 1 FTE for every 100 VMs. And again, there's an article there that where they've done that research. So that kind of gives us the cost side. And in this particular case, it shows, yeah, VMC on AWS would be certainly worth looking into as opposed to public cloud native. The other part of the analysis we do is at the bottom where we take a look at how much time is it going to take. So obviously on-prem, you're never getting to cloud because you're staying on-prem. But for VMC on AWS, if you can dedicate 4 people to doing the workload, we're suggesting that based on benchmarks we've seen with other customers, you can do that probably 2 to 4 weeks. Whereas it would take 32 months or about 2.7 years with the same resources to do the public cloud, native public cloud migration. And we've seen actually real examples of this. I worked with one customer that needed to move 2,500 applications to public cloud. They started a 3-year project. 2.5 years into the project, they've moved 25 out of 2,500. So the problem is these can take quite a bit of time. The graph we're showing over to the right takes a look at moving that needle. So if we were to move that green line down to where the VMware Cloud solution is, what would it cost us to accelerate that? And that's what we're calculating. The additional labor that would be required is about $1.2 million to be able to move that, acquire the additional resources to get that done faster. Okay, so it gives you an idea of what these, kind of a ballpark for what these numbers would be. Okay. Now, we mentioned the time thing, and this is one thing that I think is really the most revealing to a lot of people is, costs in any conversion, any migration, they're going to start up initially. They're going to go higher. You expect them to come down over time as you're transitioning and moving workloads from on-prem to the cloud service. And optimally, your savings are going to be the best when that curve can be quickly flattened. So the chart over to the right is what we call our bubble chart. And so it's showing, business as usual, as on-premise costs are kind of the straight blue line. We're showing that the cloud migration costs, so they will spike up and they will start to go down as you start replacing on-premise applications with applications that you're creating through instances on public cloud native. We also look at this we analyze this from truly a consumption basis. So for example, if you're going to need 1,000 instances over 3 years, the model doesn't assume you're going to go out and subscribe to 1,000 instances on day one. That makes no sense. So the model really assumes you're only buying instances as you're ready to consume them. So it actually does, I think, put a realistic perspective here. The point we usually make, though, is that the green line shows that, yes, there is a spike as well with VMware Cloud on AWS as well, as you're adding the services. But because the transition time is so short, that bubble quickly drops off and you start to gain the savings. So again, we're just pointing out that, with public cloud, longer migration is equal to longer duplication of the on-premises costs. You have to keep carrying those costs longer. There's greater risk of a project delay, overruns, or abandonment. And VMware Cloud on AWS is faster to the savings recognition. And some of the things we show on the chart next to it is another similar way of looking at it. When we show fully burdened public cloud costs, what we're showing is that's the public cloud plus the dynamically changing part of the on-premises cost that's going to be transitioning during that time period as well. Okay, so I take a look at this. I mean, I sell this. I'm in marketing, so I'm not in sales. But to me, I've always been excited about this solution because I think it's a very cool solution. I say kind of, what's not to like about it. VMware Cloud is the fastest path to cloud. It's actually 46% faster. There's a hyperlink at the bottom. I set it up so it's easy for you to just scan and go look at the research on it, and it can tell you how we came up with those numbers. As far as completeness and speed, it reduces time, it reduces costs, it reduces risk. I think it helps reduce failure. From flexibility, it gives our customers flexibility on demand. It empowers agility, reduces lock-in. And then when we look at the hidden cost side of it, it reduces the switching costs, it reduces the downtime, and it also reduces, I think, lock-in as well. So as my favorite friend, Gary Larson, pointed out to us with Einstein here, Einstein discovered that time actually is money.
Do you think that the primary use case for moving to VMC is to reduce costs, or are there other use cases where cost is just a factor in a larger drive to move things?
I think cost is probably always somewhere in the mix. It may be not on the top of the stack, but it's always in there. A lot of times what we're seeing is what we call compelling events. Like, for example, a data center lease is coming up, where you need to decide something, whether to release the on-premises or to move to cloud. And actually, the models we produce actually has a simulation in it where you can put in how many months do we have to get this done, and it will calculate how much extra that's going to cost to do it. But yeah, I think there's a lot of good reasons. I mean, some companies are really looking to get to cloud quickly, and cost is obviously in there as well at some point.
Okay. And one of the interesting things that I saw there was a potential argument that staying on-prem is more expensive. Do you think that is generally speaking true? And does that only make sense if you move absolutely everything? Because a lot of people aren't going to evacuate their entire data center if they aren't leasing it.
Yeah. Well, we've got some organizations do complete data center evacuations. And this is what we call a greenfield type of analysis when we do it. So we take a look at what would be, the workloads you want to move. So the workloads may not be your entire data center. We look at what are you putting within scope. And then we calculate what the equivalent cost to do that on-premise would be. And then we can tweak and adjust it to match the customer's actual spend. But the idea is that I see this solution as a hybrid mix. And I think Kit is going to be talking about that here in a bit as well. I don't think there's only one solution. I think the future of solutions is going to be probably a combination of some on-prem, some multi-cloud, some on workloads on multiple clouds. I think that's really where the solution is. And I think in my thinking, it makes sense to look at the use case and look at the applications. Because, for example, if you've got like high latency types of applications, that might not make sense to put in the cloud.
Right.
So I don't see it as a one size fits all. Everything should go VMC, AWS, and nothing else anywhere else. So
right. It's nuanced. You have to take a look at your business requirements and what's technically feasible, and then I guess see what makes the most sense for you, right?
Correct. And that's one of the things we try to do is with our economic analyses. Again, we're the marketing department. We're not really trying to sell you. What I'm trying to do is help you come up with the information you need to make an informed decision. And if you choose to really look at VMware Cloud and AWS, be able to back that up, to back up the story that you can come up with a compelling business case that you can back up with your numbers. That's what we try to help our customers do.
Makes sense. Thank you.
And a lot of this looks like it's overlap with what's in the VROPS WhatIf Analysis tools right now, right? Because if I remember, there are some planning utilities there that would let you kind of simulate what your current workloads would cost if you move to any number of cloud providers or the VMC and AWS service offering.
Yeah, that may be. What we focus on, like I said, our economists sometimes get pulled into more detailed financial arguments. So a lot of times they're dealing with CapEx and cash flows and all kinds of other stuff as well. So, but we can help really at any part of the decision process.
It's interesting. I think that I speak for a lot of us here. So you have a lot of architects on the call, And so every slide that came up, every set of numbers that we looked at, we're immediately like use casing all of them. And we're going, well, that depends, and that depends, and then that really depends. And so we could spend hours parsing through each one of those things and try. I mean, it's definitely a different way of thinking about it than I have. To Ned's point, our use cases has always been like, quick evac, or VMware admins that want to stay VMware admins but still want to move to the cloud. There's a lot of use cases, and to position it like this is definitely giving me something to chew on and think about.
Okay, well, good. There's a lot of resources out there under cloud. I think cloud.vmware.com that a lot of white papers. As I mentioned, we had I'll bring it back up here. Just that hyperlink if you're interested. Well, if I can click the right button, there you go. This hyperlink is one, and we've got a lot of other research out there that if you're interested can provide additional information.
Checking it out. Thank you.
Hey, Craig. Do you guys have numbers on how many people actually go this route and then actually switch to native cloud, public cloud? Is this like the gateway drug to public? Are you seeing that more of the use case, or is this more of, the traditional private data center on VMware going to public cloud, continuing down that path?
Yeah. I don't know if I've got any good numbers on any of that yet. I saw some recent numbers that there's something like over 100,000 VMs running in this setup now. But the idea is that, again, I look at it from the standpoint of it gets you, first of all, quickly to cloud and lets you start to gain the economies and the lower cost of running through cloud. It also lets you redeploy some resources that we're just doing, honestly, keeping the lights on kind of stuff, keeping the hardware running, stuff like that. It lets you take those resources and deploy them somewhere else into other functions. I think like DevSecOps is probably a good place to plug those people in, working directly with the apps developers. So I think it helps you get along that path, but it also doesn't close off. Well, we've got some other apps here that really should be public cloud native. And I think that's where, VMware strategy, that's where the Kubernetes and the Tanzu solutions are coming into play, is, Kubernetes being built into vSphere, is to try to help make that path continuous. Because we recognize that it's not one size fits all. There are certain use cases where things need to be done a certain way.
Okay, cool.
But
Thank you.
Is running Kubernetes on VMware on AWS, that seems like at that point you're going to move over into cloud native tooling and skip the extra costs.
Well, the thing is, with it built into vSphere, it's all about the management console and being able to manage the workloads, and that's keeping it integrated into the tools that your team is already.
Yeah, but I think if people are truly going to realize the values of moving into the cloud, they may want the quick lift and shift into the cloud with this solution, which I think makes total sense. But it seems like they're going to start peeling off apps and take advantage of cloud native tools that are in whatever provider they went to, whether it's AWS, Azure, or wherever they go to.
Right.
I don't know why you would keep all of your apps just running in the kind of traditional sense, just like they were in your data center.
Again, I think it comes up to basically to the business use cases and where you really want to devote the resources to development and running those things. And also, do you need the flexibility? And we mentioned of being able to move back and forth. I know of one use case where a customer had moved their workloads to Azure native, and it required a lot of rehosting or refactoring to get those applications to work. And then after they moved them there, they discovered that the Azure cloud implementation of SQL wasn't exactly the same as the on-prem native version of SQL, and they then had to go through a whole.
Shocked. I wish that was the case, but I agree. I believe that 100%. Yeah.
So they then had to go through a whole nother refactoring to move the applications back. So those are some of the things that's where we try to just expose people to the ideas of what are some of the other costs, other things to think about.
Yeah, that just sounds like poor planning on my side, because Microsoft makes a migration assistant, right? They'll tell you if your SQL database is compatible with Azure SQL or not, right?
Yeah.
And then that's why they have managed instance when it's not, but you don't want to actually run a VM with SQL Server on it, right? So,
speaking of VMware, we actually had a question from the viewers. Someone was curious if all the same things that you've been talking about with VMC also apply to the other VMware on cloud solutions like AVS for Azure.
Yeah, I think many of the economics that we're bringing out here would be the same for AVS, Azure VMware services, I think is what we're calling that one. We're also developing the Google and the Oracle implementations as well. Yeah, the economics may be a little bit different in terms of the cost from the cost of the solution, the cost of what the comparable on public cloud native would be, but the economics are still the same. They're basically all the same.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.